The first act tonight is a right treat for you. Please go wild for James Sumner!
Thank you, Walter. Yeah, it's Fleming's right-hand rule, not Faraday's.
Oh no, sorry.
I've got to do that, it's my job. I'm a historian of science. And I've travelled to be here tonight. I've travelled all the way from a city called Manchester. Home of the University of Manchester, which is itself home to the National Graphene Institute. You all encountered graphene, okay? We won the material. It's the thinnest material in the world, and it costs about £150 a kilo. So you can get the same effect by buying a roll of bin liners and putting the heating on for an hour. So, yeah, but I'm not going to talk about graphene because the structure of graphene, as you all know, is hexagonal. And tonight we're talking about circles. And the circles I want to talk to you about actually have to do with what happens in places that makes them famous, because I'm going to talk about blue plaques. Okay, you've all seen the blue plaques, big round blue things on walls, right? And there's what people don't tell you. The official blue plaque scheme, the original official blue plaque scheme, was created by the old London County Council, and although English Heritage have taken it over, it's still specific to London. So if you see any blue plaques up somewhere else, somebody else has done that. There's all sorts of groups that do them. So so that we don't get a London bias here, somebody name me a random British city, any city.
York.
Manchester, I'm here in Manchester. So, I want to tell you a bit about the plaques, or the possible plaques, in and around the University of Manchester, because there's a lot of interesting scientific history grown up around Manchester, but there's a bit of a problem with Manchester's scientific greats, which is that they often, somehow, for some reason, don't do what they're supposed to. They become famous for the wrong things, or in the wrong place. And I'll give you an example of that. Okay, so let's think about, just going beyond science, right? Who's the greatest analytical philosopher of the 20th century? Who would you say? Yeah, I'm hearing Ludwig Wittgenstein. Okay, very good. Yeah, we're all Wittgenstein fans here. You know, I'm sure you've all read the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, and you know sort of all the stuff. You know, the catchphrase is the meaning is constructed by public standards of correctness and all that kind of thing. You know, the private language argument. Yeah. We're all big Wittgenstein fans. And Wittgenstein came to the University of Manchester in 1908 to begin his glittering career in the field of aeronautical engineering. Okay, now this is true. Before he'd done any of the philosophy stuff, what he's famous for, Wittgenstein was building experimental box kites to test aerodynamic properties, and he didn't even fly them in Manchester. I mean, you couldn't, because there was no sky in Manchester. Before the passage of the Clean Air Act, there was just a sort of a horrible sort of chemical smog thing that killed you. So he used to do it up on the moors above Glossop in Derbyshire. This is all true. Now, I don't know if you have attempted to affix a blue plaque to a moor or to some sky. It's a challenge. But if you actually put the plaque anywhere on the University of Manchester campus, that plaque would have to say Ludwig Wittgenstein, 1889 to 1951, philosopher, did no thinking, not here. So it's not great. I'll give you another example. Okay, one of the things you can do with heritage is you can highlight the contribution of groups that maybe been overlooked. For instance, women scientists. So Marie Stopes, probably the most famous, certainly the earliest woman lecturer at the University of Manchester, went there in 1904, and she's somebody who's got, it's a massive reputation, but it's a double-edged reputation. because she believed in all sorts of things that we take for granted. She believed in women's rights, sex education, birth control. She was also famously a eugenicist. She was opposed to the mixing of races. She favoured compulsory sterilisation for people who she considered inferior. And so, you know, for good and for ill, she's got this enormous, controversial cocktail of a reputation of sort of ideas that she threw out concerning the future of women and the future of humanity. And she came to the University of Manchester in 1904 to study paleobotany, which, if you don't know what it is, paleobotany, it's fossils, but of plants. So, and usually in coal. So you get a big bit of coal and you bash it open and, ooh, look, it's an angiosperm, that's interesting. Right, and there is actually a plaque there. It's sort of shoved around a corner on the university campus. It's kind of, it's not so much the eugenics, it's the kind of, ooh, she's sort of done the wrong thing. And Alan Turing has a bit of an excuse, because the thing that Alan Turing is now most famous for is all that top secret code breaking work, what he did during the Second World War. And like when he went to Manchester, obviously he wasn't famous for that because it was top secret. He couldn't tell anybody about it because it was top secret. But he was, so he went to Manchester in 1948. He was one of only a handful of people in the entire world who had at that stage designed a computer, an electronic computer. Okay? And it hadn't been built, but there was, at the University of Manchester, there were several electrical engineers who were among the very, very few people in the world who had actually built an electronic computer. So you would probably imagine, when Turing came to Manchester, he'd get himself into the business of designing electronic computers. No. No. Alan Turing's best known work from his time in Manchester is it's a 1950 article in a journal for philosophers of psychology, and when he wasn't doing that stuff, he was using mathematical models based on ideas from physical chemistry to try to explain the development of form and shape in plant and animal life. And I'm thinking, Alan, that's not going to fit on the plaque. Most places can do this right. I mean, Oxford does not have this problem. You know, the most famous, let's say the most famous female researcher associated with the University of Oxford, that would probably be Dorothy Hodgkin, right, the X-ray crystallographer. Now, she's a woman with a game plan. 1937, gets a PhD in X-ray crystallography. 1940s and 50s, does pioneering, trailblazing work in X-ray crystallography. 1964, gets the Nobel Prize for her work in X-ray crystallography. You know, it's a pretty straightforward, it's not rocket science. It's X-ray crystallography, and that is very much the point. Okay, and, you know, at this stage I sort of think, is it just the sciences? Is it, what if we look at the creative arts? What if we come a bit more recent? And what if we think about students who studied at the University of Manchester? Do we get the same problem? The Chemical Brothers. Okay, know the Chemical Brothers, the Electro Dance Act. They studied at the University of Manchester. Did they study music? Did they bog roll? The Chemical Brothers studied, and the name Chemical Brothers might be a bit of a clue here. History. Sorry, it wasn't a bit of a clue at all. And I'm thinking, is there something in the water at the University of Manchester, or in the Manchester area? Is there some sort of outflow from the factories, in some sense, which is destroying people's concentration spans and stopping them working on the thing that they're supposed to be famous for? Vimto, of course, was invented in Manchester, with the first batch in 1908, the same year that Ludwig Wittgenstein arrived. Just an observation. Yeah, the old, some of you will remember UMIS, the old technical university, merged into the University of Manchester, 2004, same problem. Margaret Beckett, who briefly led the Labour Party in this country, you know, big political figure in the 2000s, she did an HND in metallurgy which is the material science of metals. Okay? Any metallurgists in? Brilliant, I've got a joke for you. Metallurgists will find this really funny, okay? Which former leader of the British Labour Party is the best at increasing the ductility of metals? Anneal Kinnock. Because the annealing process... Look, don't judge me! I am doing my best to find connections in a world that has none. There is... Okay, so I looked and there is one individual who books the trend. Ernest Rutherford, the atomic physicist. He built up Manchester into a world centre for atomic physics. He had researchers like Hans Geiger, who created the first Geiger radiation counter in Manchester. And every day, Rutherford would go around the labs and say, "Hi, what are you doing?" I'm inventing a radiation counter. Is that for atomic physics? Why, yes, of course it is. Yes, and I'm an atomic physicist. We're all atomic physicists. Great. You're not doing anything else then? You've not got distracted? No, just the atomic physics. You're not re-evaluating the merits of the Petrarchan against the Shakespearean sonnet? No, I'm just doing physics. You're not curing TB? No. Good. And so he achieved this colossal reputation in physics. And so it came to pass that in 1908, Ernest Rutherford received the Nobel Prize for chemistry. What can you do? Well, what you can do is to be sensible and serious and think, a lot of these categories, these pigeonholes, they don't reflect the world. Okay? People have various ideas. People talk to other people network, people cross-pollinate. Alan Turing was a long way ahead of his time in the associations of ideas that he came up with. And you can, rather than elevating individuals onto ridiculous pedestals, you can take a more sensible and a more organic approach to the way that history works. Unless you are writing a university press release. Because in a press release, you can only really do stupid ideas. If you try to be sensible, it doesn't work. And that is why we focus so much on graphene, okay? And we're going to get graphene plaques everywhere. They're going to be the world's thinnest plaques. We're building graphene. If you go to the canteen, you get graphene on a bat. The buildings themselves are made out of graphene. And there's even now, at the University of Manchester, there is Graphene Bright Club. And if you go in and watch that, you will see the graphene version of me delivering, as I have delivered to you today, the world's thinnest material.